Welcome back to another episode of the 5G Guys. I'm Wayne Smith, joined by my co-host Dan McBall.
Hey Wayne, hey everyone! Thanks for coming back. Great to see you, Wayne. I know we've been traveling a lot this early summer, so it's been hit or miss, like two ships passing in the night. But great to be back together. We thought that we should do a mid-year roll-up of how things are progressing. As those of you that have been listeners for a long time know, Wayne and I always do a start to the year, our predictions for the year, and we did that back in January. And we thought maybe we'd keep ourselves a little honest and see how wrong our predictions are turning out to be. But but seriously, great time to do a check-in. End of June, a lot of big news that's come out here early summer. So what do you think? Let's dive in and check in on how things are going.
Yeah, no, I'm all about it. Yeah, it's been an interesting year to get started for sure.
Well, let's start off with the area that you and I know the most, which is the cellular carriers. And I know you're closer to that than I am. What are you seeing and hearing in the marketplace as far as the big three, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile?
Well, it's been an interesting year. And, I think with all companies, as we've seen ending 2022, in the tech space, there's been a lot of layoffs, right? Layoffs have been on the minds of everything. And I think it's starting to come through in our industry more so. At the end of 2022 with the C-band push, I think we've seen a big momentum, into the end of the year, into the first quarter of this year, where that money was already allocated to deploy those projects. Now that that's done, it's kind of a relook, and we're starting to see different cost-cutting measures coming into play. We've definitely seen a slower, from my services company, Vertex, we've definitely seen a slower uptick to more project development through 2023. Not saying they're not doing things, they're just being more particular on what they're going to build with the C-band deployment behind us pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's, how do we make the network better and how do we do things? So a slower start. The word layoff is out there. There's been a lot of people reaching out to us, for opportunities. There's rumors that AT&T is going to drop 20,000 employees. I haven't heard rumors like that from Verizon, and I have heard through, just our network that, T-Mobile's slowing up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the boom year of the 2022 of massive CapEx of 20 billion a carrier, we're back to more realistic and even maybe a little bit below prior years of somewhere between 10 and 15 billion for the big two.
Yeah. And I know one of the things we talked about in January was that we were anticipating Verizon and AT&T in particular having some challenges because they spent so much money on that C-band spectrum, and they took on debt to do that. And with rising interest rates, that puts a lot of pressure on their balance sheet. So I think that's part of what we're seeing, speculative on my part, but I think, that pressure is there. And hey, all three, the entire telecom sector as a whole, their total cap value in the stock market is down this year. The big five, AT&T, Verizon, AT&T, Comcast, and Charter, they have all taken big losses on their balance sheets this year on their stock values. And so that can't help either, right?
No, I mean, yeah. And to your point, we are seeing a different environment in our industry, right? The inflation environment. And it takes a while to filter through, back when we were talking about it big time. Now we're starting to see, the residual income. It's very difficult to refinance debt. And to your point, these boys have some debt, man. I mean, they got a big debt load. And, debt comes up for refinancing, and corporate bonds is more expensive.
Right.
And so what happens, all companies, I don't care if it's telecom or whatever, you start trying to find ways to cost cut and use that capital more efficiently. So I think we're seeing those, but, I'm still optimistic that the money will be spent just in different ways and on different things that more, and we're early in 5G. I wouldn't say that, there's been a lot of hype around 5G, but yet we're just a few years in, and look what LTE did. We're still right things on the private network space that utilize 4G LTE. Right. And so I think it's going to take a while to catch up. Sometimes we live in a world of hype. Marketers do a good job of selling something, but the use cases have to come into focus, and the technology surrounding it, and different tech has to be developed, and it takes years to do that.
Yeah. Well, and our long careers in the cellular industry, we've seen these cycles numerous times before. These cycles are not unusual, and it's a pendulum that swings, and there's always a return to increased capital spending shortly after there's a decrease. So I'm not overly concerned about it, but there's definitely some adjustment going on. And what we just talked about is a good segue into another update, which is C-band itself, right? So last year we talked about how the C-band, for those listeners that are new, or to remind you, was a band of spectrum the FCC auctioned off that was very tailored towards 5G deployments. And it's in a spectrum band that's right adjacent to this equipment that sits on airplanes that's used for ground radar for pilots to do radar assisted landing in bad weather and low visibility. Well, it's so right when the big guys that won all that spectrum, namely AT&T and Verizon, were getting ready to roll out their 5G deployments on that, everybody raised their hands and said, oh, wait a minute, we got interference problems and the 5G is going to interfere with all our planes. And that put a big delay in the deployment of 5G. And to AT&T and Verizon's credit, they came to the table. They said, okay, we'll delay our launch and they'll scale back, the power levels on any cell sites close to airports. Well, where are we at today? July 1st. The carriers are allowed to go full bore, use their spectrum, full power anywhere they want. The FAA told the carriers, hey, you have this much time to get your planes up to snuff and replace your radar equipment, and they have, for the most part. The latest news from federal regulators is that 80% of domestic aircraft have been updated, but that means there's 20% that are still out there that could have problems. And so bad weather. Pete Buttigieg came out this last week and said, hey, he's expecting flight delays all of a sudden July 1st. So I think that's some fear mongering personally. But so there's 20% of the planes in the U.S. that are behind getting updated. They will get updated. I think internationally it's like 65% of the planes have been updated. So we should see full utilization of that spectrum now starting in the second half of the year.
Yeah, one little add note to that. I think I've read that, I think one of the issues with the spectrum in airplanes is there was not any really research done on, electronics, not any updated over in the near term of impact of the frequency. You know what I mean? So a lot of it is let's err to the side of caution versus this is scientific. This is really going to impact the airplane or the electronics. And so that's a lot happening in society. We err too much to the side of caution without putting the right research in place to make sure there's even a conflict there.
Right. And as a matter of fact, with this, we've had 3, maybe 4 episodes on this topic over the last year or so. The best one to check out on how real this problem really is episode 29. We had a aviation expert by the name of Vance Hilderman on, and I mean, he was awesome. Like, he really took us through the details of how real the problem was. And it is real, but to your point, Wayne, it's a lot of times it's a lot of politicians and influencers that are driving the ship as opposed to the technical folks. But anyway, so that's an update on C-band. I'm sure the carriers, as you said, they've spent a ton of money to build out their sites so that they can use C-band, and they'll be able to take full advantage of that finally. So that's good. Hey, real quick, a quick word of thanks to today's sponsor, Vertex Innovations. For over 17 years, Vertex has been building the nation's wireless and broadband networks. Providing project management, network engineering, and construction oversight are just some of the ways Vertex helps their clients. So if you're looking for more of a partner to help you with your wireless network designs, construction, implementation, or operations, reach out to Vertex. You can find them at vertex-us.com. That's VERTEX-us.com. So what else we got going on? Big news around another carrier, right? Dish.
Yeah. So, let's hear it. Jump in, man. They've deployed. So bring us up to date, Dan.
Yeah. So Dish has been building out a nationwide network for the last 3 years, and the spectrum that they were allocated to do that with, the FCC had some requirements on them that said, hey, we'll let you guys use the spectrum, but you have to build out a certain percentage of the U.S. by a certain time frame, or else you're in default and could lose the spectrum. And their big deadline was June of this year, that they had to cover 70% of the population in the United States in their build out. And they made it. They made it by the skin of their teeth, but they did. They officially announced that they have launched their network. and I'm trying to remember what they call it. There's a name they're using, their marketing name. It's called Project Genesis, I believe. And so they have markets all over the US that they have service of their own now, that they're augmenting their resale service. So they have a resale service. They bought Boost. So Boost Infinite is a resale service where they're reselling AT&T and T-Mobile network service. And then now they're augmenting it with their own service. So if you're a Dish customer or a Boost Infinite customer, depending on where you're at, you might be using Boost or Dish's own network now. And then when you're not in coverage, you'll be using either AT&T or T-Mobile's networks. That's a big move. That gives us a fourth nationwide carrier now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a monumental task that they do. So all the people that we know in the infrastructure space that built that network, man, congratulations. You guys got it done. And you took the experience. So really proud of all the people who support that. Next thing, sales teams, good luck getting people to budge on changing carriers, because, that's a hard piece for the sales teams out there. But big applause for the folks who are on the ground, who are putting the work in and getting that infrastructure built. So congratulations, guys.
Absolutely. And I can tell you through experience, being part of greenfield network buildouts in the mid 90s to late 90s, as a new entrant, they have a competitive edge on the legacy guys because they are deploying the latest and greatest technology that the rest of the carriers are struggling to deploy themselves because they've got this legacy infrastructure they have to maintain. So it'll be interesting to see, they're a full 5G, no 4G, no 3G. It's 100% 5G. They're the first carrier to deploy voice over 5G. All the other carriers have to move your phone down to 4G to do voice or even 3G. So it'll be interesting to watch. And their service offering is it's $25 a month, unlimited, everything. So that's pretty disruptive. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
For sure. And, just like all things, I'm sure they've targeted the big metropolitan areas in their network growth. Rural areas, I'm not so sure they have, but you might know more about that. And it's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
$25 a month.
For sure. The way you get to 70% of the population as quick as possible is in the dense urban core. So, they're in the 20 or so most dense, urban areas to launch, and they're not going to have any service out in the rural parts of the US or what have you. And they may just stick to being, focused on population density. We'll see. But so anyways, to your point, congrats to those folks. I know how hard that is, and huge progress for them, and they'll continue to progress. So what else last year? Let's see. What are some of our other predictions back in January?
The broadband. I mean, we talked about FWA, right? Because that was the end of the year boom. I still think that's picking up steam.
Fixed wireless access, right? So for our listeners, that's basically the cellular guys competing with their cable competitors, namely Verizon and T-Mobile, using their cellular 5G service to provide broadband to the home to compete with folks like Charter and Comcast Xfinity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to remember end of the year what their numbers were at. I know T-Mobile was adding about 500,000 customers a quarter.
Yes, they were like 3 million, and Verizon was like 1.2, but Verizon was catching up. I mean, that's one of the big bright spots for Verizon was the FWA, service. But so that was one of the things. But I think overall, I mean, as we left 22 and moving into 23, is broadband itself,
Mm-hmm.
And I know you have some updates you want to jump in there just this week.
Well, I'll tell you, hot off the press. So we're recording on June 27th, and on June 26th, the federal government officially announced the release of over $42 billion as part of the infrastructure stimulus plan that was passed as the back end of the pandemic. And specifically, there was a program called BEAD, that stands for Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment, that's basically designated to fill the digital divide, get broadband to those folks in the U.S. and U.S. territories that don't have, either underserved or unserved for broadband. So they released that 42.5, or they didn't release it, they announced the allocation of it just yesterday.
Yeah, I did read that the checks will be delivered in 1 year. So they'll have access to the funds 1 year from today.
Okay.
So all the planning gets to go into effect, and then those states will have that kind of dollars, which will be great.
Well, it's funny you say that because I read that they could get, as much as 20% this year. So as is always the case, the government kind of keeps us guessing on exactly how it's going to happen. But we do know that each state was allocated a certain amount of money. I think the smallest allocation was the U.S. Virgin Islands at like 27 million, and Texas was the largest at 3.3 billion.
Oof.
And yeah, so those states now have to give the federal government their plan. The federal government can approve that plan. They have 180 days to get that approval. And then at that point, they can start getting access to those funds to allocate to their projects in each of their states.
Yeah, I think the last thing to that's important for people to realize that it's where the private public partnership comes together,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's where, and so that's great for all of us in the industry, who, what are we going to do next? These are a lot of projects that, people that you and I know who deploy an infrastructure, they get to do the public private partnership and help those
Mm-hmm.
states deploy those resources. We have seen some projects definitely in Texas and stuff where some of the municipalities are trying to go ahead and put in their own broadband network around
Mm-hmm.
using their right of ways. So that's pretty exciting. I mean, exciting times, man. Hopefully we'll get to a point where everyone in the states has access to broadband access.
Yeah, I mean, this could be a really interesting sort of turn of events in terms of those that have been the most underserved could all of a sudden become the best served, because we're looking at some of these projects are fiber to the home, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So folks in rural Alabama, for example, the one of the largest utility companies, Alabama, has been deploying a fiber to the home network since 2020, and they just got a huge chunk of money coming their way, most likely as part of this project, where they're going to be doing fiber to a lot of rural folks. So, it'll be interesting to see, and big impact. I mean, we all understand the impacts of lack of broadband in education and healthcare, and so we were a little behind, right? We predicted that we would start seeing some activity this year. Of course, the funding got held up. No big surprise. When the government gets involved, things go slower, but we're seeing progress, and so don't expect to see anything starting to build with those funds this year. To your point, next year would be probably the most likely time, but we'll start seeing some engineering and some planning going on this year. So that's good news.
Yeah. Good news. And then we couldn't have a podcast and talk about where we're at without Elon Musk, right?
Right.
Who's into everything. So jump into that, man. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah. So Starlink has been, very disruptive with their, deployment of broadband via satellite, lower Earth orbit satellites. When we finished up last year, I think they were forecasting that they were going to get to like 4,400 satellites launched to cover the Earth. And the last update in May was that they're at over 4,000 satellites. So they're on track. Yep. They're covering more and more of the Earth. I've seen stats out there now where independent folks are verifying service in markets in places like Africa and South America and Asia. And, they're reporting really good service. They're reporting, upwards of 80, 90 megabits per second downlink in some areas. The US is not as good. They're averaging something like 56 megabits per second in Mexico, for example. So it's interesting to see how that performance is rolling out, but it's competitive, and it's getting a lot of people in areas around the globe, like the Ukraine, and their support of their efforts against Russia have been significantly impacted by the use of Starlink.
Oh man. Yeah. That's probably understated what that's done for that horrible conflict over there. Pretty amazing though, that he's on track and he's getting that done. And, you think about it, satellite, broadband is not a new thing. There's been Hughes, and I mean, we got to talk about Dish and Direct,
Viasat.
And Viasat. And so he's just doing it a little different. And there's definitely a market for it. And there's a lot of applications, definitely in the rural, hard to get places. It's made, I would call outdoor tourism more effective. Mm-hmm. So you can go into remote places, enjoy the peaceful. Now, some would argue, why do you need broadband if you're going outside? But we always want to stay connected with our families and our businesses. And so a very, hands off to Elon. He's getting it done.
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, to your point, I think this year they released a product for recreational vehicles so that you could have Starlink on your RV. So there you go.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
cool. Pretty cool.
Yeah. So let's see, what other kind of updates do we have? So we talked a little bit about Dish and the fact that they resell T-Mobile and AT&T in addition to their own network. There was some rumors recently floated by one of the largest tech companies in the world, in Amazon, that
Ooh.
they're dropping hints that they want to become a virtual service operator, basically someone that would resell one of the big three carriers or big four now carrier service under the Amazon Prime brand. And rumors being that, maybe we would see very discounted or even free service for Prime members as part of that play. So that's very recently released news. Not really sure how much truth there is to it, because right afterwards, all three of the AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile were quick to come out in their earnings reports and say, we aren't talking to them. We don't know who they're going to be using. So Amazon's kind of keeping us all guessing, but that's going to be an interesting one to watch. Have you seen or heard anything around that?
No, but I do know this. I mean, Amazon has 300 million active subscribers.
Wow.
So it would be disruptive
Mm-hmm.
if they offered something as part of their service. I haven't read anything about it. I know that they have a little bit of headwinds in front of them with their Prime. I like Amazon. We're an Amazon house. We get deliveries way more than we should. So I could see it happening. I mean, how do you monetize that amount of customers? You bring
Right.
different services and you bundle things that make sense for them. So, yeah, it's pretty amazing the world that we're moving into.
There's been some rumor as well that maybe we would expect to see, since the main three carriers have vocalized that they're not talking to Amazon, that maybe we'd be seeing an Amazon Dish partnership. But the problem with that is Dish themselves is reselling T-Mobile and AT&T, and they couldn't legally resell that to Amazon. So who knows, man? It's gonna be interesting to see. There's probably
Yeah.
something none of us are thinking about that'll come out, but keep an eye on that for sure.
Yeah, I think one thing that I learned in the first 6 months that we didn't predict, and this is kind of interesting. We do a lot of different things, and on our podcast, we've had some really great podcasts. I thought this first half of the year too, learned a lot of things about new technology, both from AT&T and Verizon. But one of the interesting things was in large venues where the paradigm shifting. We've always been, what's your download speed type of society. Now we're moving to, what's your upload speed, because more people want to share their experiences in large venues. So that was something, that's we didn't predict, that this definitely starting to see a paradigm shift in that kind of venue and environment. Yeah, download's important, but not when you're at a show or a large venue, but more you want to upload your stuff as fast as possible. So a paradigm shift in how that's done.
Yeah, for sure. And we heard that straight from the horse's mouth when we had Philip French from Verizon on, and he
Mm-hmm.
announced on our podcast that they were going to be releasing this new release in their network at the what was it? It was at the NFL draft in Kansas City, I
Oh
believe.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Back just a month or so ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So one of the other ones that we did, and you have to remind me, was about the new 6G. That was so fascinating, that new technology.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So I think our first 6 months have been, I really, really enjoyed it. I thought we gained some momentum in the podcast and we learned a lot of things that about new and emerging technologies that are
Yeah.
coming our
Yeah.
way.
How about the Art Pregler from AT&T and all the stuff they're doing with drones and robot dogs? I mean, that was amazing. And the way that
Yeah.
they're getting connectivity out to where it needs to be through autonomous devices and mechanisms, and then Qualcomm sharing with us the ability for AI to be processed right on the device and not even need the network anymore. Like,
Whew.
this stuff is coming true, right? All of these things that we predict are surprisingly, all of a sudden we had guests coming on saying, "Oh yeah, we're doing that." So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Pretty amazing. So it's been an interesting start to the year. It definitely
Mhm.
has.
What do you
I
think
think.
about Apple's release recently? They just announced, well, first of all, their what's it called, the Apple Vision Pro AR VR headset, and then I think what else did they announce? Their they're merging FaceTime with Apple TV. So you'll be able to do like video group calls on your TV at home. Like, do you think those, Apple's had a long history of pushing the envelope on these networks and being the impetus for a lot of network advancement. What do you think about those announcements? You think those will be the same, or you think they're kind of fluff?
No, no. I think the tech. There's probably a need for the technology in a sense. Mm-hmm. One thing I will admit, since I have been on family vacation for it seems like a month, I have not. I did one thing that I think we all need to do. I disconnected from the news. And so I'm just catching up, getting back last week. I know about the announcement, but I literally I have not dove deep into any of those yet. And really just catching up. So enjoying the downtime from technology for 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, like the AR VR headset thing, that was of course started by Meta with their device, and now Apple has theirs. Like, that's really interesting to me. Like, I kind of feel like it's a little ahead of its time, right? Outside of like gaming, like the use cases and stuff, I think are still kind of getting sorted out. But I think what's the most interesting for me is just that wireless networks have to be leveraged to make this stuff work, whether it's cellular, whether it's Wi-Fi, whether it's Bluetooth. And so that's where I just geek out, right? Is understanding how these advances are leveraging connectivity that's wireless and not just, you can't walk around the house with a Ethernet cord hooked up to your VR headset, right? It's not, it doesn't work. So
no. Well, I think the main thing about VR, AR, and it's hard maybe to get your mind around, but it's going to be the new way in education. Mm-hmm. It's just, it combines two worlds, real world and a virtual world, so you can learn things. And I do think, give it 10 years, most people will learn, skilled trades, different things by using that kind of technology. So, I do see the practical pieces of it. We tried some different things with our software company and, in VR. Not VR, augmented reality, where you layer it on top. I do see a lot of value in teaching that way. And as we're learning, in society, we're learning a new way. Where, via the internet, via the connections and wirelessly, like no matter where you are, if you're having a conversation and you're talking about something that you're unfamiliar with, you're going to use your wireless device to go look at it and Google it. Or now use ChatGPT or Bard or one of those to try to figure out information. You're not going to wait. You're doing it in real time. And so the way we learn is definitely going to be impacted by these innovations and the way we communicate.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I just learned last month about a big initiative that Microsoft has around the space of digital twins in their Azure cloud. And so they're trying to create huge databases of digital twins. What's a digital twin? Well, it's just a digital approximation or duplication, really, of anything physical in the world. So it could be floor plans for a building. In our world, it's digital twins for towers, where we have a digital version of the tower, and an engineer can go do structural analysis on it. But there's digital twins for the human body, right? So a medical student doesn't have to do an actual autopsy anymore. They could use augmented reality to learn about the anatomy in the human body and so Microsoft is making a huge push to have a huge database in the cloud of all these different things that could have digital twins to support augmented and virtual reality. So, Jeff Bratcher from FirstNet, right? Imagine first responders, a firefighter going in with a heads-up display on their helmet where they have an augmented reality of the floor plan of the building, so that if it's smoky and they can't see, they can still see where the walls are and they can see where the fire panel's at, and just really cool stuff. So I love it.
Wow. What a first 6 months, Dan. It's been, it's just, and even plugging the podcast a bit, I've really enjoyed the 6 months. As you get into the flow and we're learning and meeting really exciting guests, it's been, it's fun to do predictions and then see where we are.
For sure. Absolutely. Well, thanks, bud. I appreciate it. Welcome home. And to all our listeners, hope your summer's off to a great start. And we'll look forward to catching up next time.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the 5G Guys. For more resources and to connect with Dan and Wayne, check out their website at 5gguys.com. you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit that follow button and share this episode with your friends and family.